In this lecture, we'll rig up our stumble hit animation to fire off through code. Now that we can properly trigger this animation in our animator directly, let's go ahead and rig that up in our player collision class. So let's go ahead and find our scripts, player, and our player collision handler. We just need some sort of way that we can gain access to that set trigger string reference and then fire that off directly in our player collision class. Well, we do need a reference to our animator, so let's go ahead and grab that. I'll create that as a serialized field, and we'll grab a reference to our animator, and I'll just call it animator with a lowercase a. Let's make sure we assign that once we get back to Unity in our inspector. With this animator reference, we can actually just replace this debug.log with animator.setTrigger, and then pass through that string reference. So capital HIT hit, remembering that this hit is case sensitive. However, just like we learned before, we don't like to actually hard code our string references directly through these built-in Unity methods. So let's just create a constant string reference up top. So const string, we'll call it hit string, and we'll just set that equal to be capital HIT hit. And then we can just pass that through our set trigger built-in Unity method. If you recall back in our animator, there's more than one different type of parameter, even though in this case, we're just specifically setting a trigger to transition from one animation to the other. But you can also do things like set a Boolean value, an integer value, set a float value, etc. I'll make sure I leave a link to the Unity documentation for some of those animator properties for both getting and setting some of those other parameter values. For our case, we actually should have this working properly. Let's go try this out back in Unity. Before we hit play, we just want to make sure that on our player game object, on our player collision handler script, we just need to set this animator reference. So this animator is on this king game object here. Well, we can actually just drag in this entire game object into our animator field, and it will automatically assign that animator component from this king game object. Nice, let's go ahead and open up our animator just so we can see if everything is working properly here. With our king selected, we should be able to hit play. Well, great. Every single time we get hit by a fence or get hit by an obstacle, let's see if I can hit this barrel. Yep, there we go. We're properly stumbling our king and firing that animation transition effect. Now it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but let's see if I can hit this fence and this box at the exact same time. Okay, perfect. You can actually see it even actually had a little bit of a hard time detecting when we exactly hit the box because we're triggering halfway through the transition and the animator doesn't exactly know what to do with itself. So I think we should set up some sort of cooldown hit effect so that our player king can only get hit once in a while. Probably something only in between 1 to 2 seconds. I don't think it needs to be too drastic. Which will introduce you to this lecture's challenge. Create a cooldown timer in our player collision handler class so that the player can only get hit by an obstacle no less than every 1 second. There's a few different ways to go about doing this, so I think it would make a great challenge to see if you can implement some sort of solution on your own. You could go about doing something like this using some sort of time.time cooldown or just some sort of time.delta time cooldown. Go ahead and give it your best effort. We'll go through my solution when you get back. Pause the video. I'll see you here shortly. Welcome back. I'm going to go ahead and open up my player collision handler class. Inside here, I'm going to go ahead and start by serializing a float that we can just define in the inspector. I'll call mine collision cooldown. And for now, we can just go ahead and set that to 1 second, but we can modify it a little bit later on if we need to tweak the values. Below our constant variable, let's also create another private float that I'll just call cooldown timer, and we'll initialize that to 0 at the beginning. And in my update method, I would just like to increase that value. So cooldown timer, and I'll use plus equals time.delta time, just so this cooldown timer is always incrementing in seconds. Down below in our onCollision enter method, we can just say if cooldown timer is less than our collision cooldown, well then we just want to return and not execute any of this code. However, after we fire this code, then we do want to set our cooldown timer back to 0 so this cooldown can go ahead and reset and kind of restart this loop. Great, let's go try that out back in Unity. I'll go ahead and blow up my game window and we should have this cooldown working properly. Now it does actually have a nice double effect. Let's see if we can hit this obstacle right after. There we go. Okay, you can see that when we hit the cart in our head within 1 second, it didn't actually once again fire that full animation loop. So I think we're actually set to go. It also does have a nice double use intended effect to make sure that our player actually can't get hit in the first second of the game, just in case for whatever reason a fence spawns on top of our player. That's all I wanted to handle in this lecture. When you're ready to move on, I'll see you in the next one.